I want to start by talking about the Tucker Carlson story. And by the Tucker Carlson story, I mean Tucker's allegation that the NSA was snooping on his private text messages and emails, and the NSA's non-denial. They essentially created a straw man and said, oh, we had no intention of trying to get Tucker off the air, but they never actually said we were not snooping on his text messages or his emails, and they said nothing. They said nothing about that whatsoever, which is very shady. Joining me now is Fred Fleitz. Fred is the former chief of staff to the National Security Council. He also served for over a decade in the CIA and for many years on the House Intelligence Committee. As staff. He's currently the CEO of the Center for Security Policy. And the reason that I'm giving this rundown of his resume is because if there is one person in this nation eminently qualified to discuss our intelligence community and the reforms that need to be made, it is Fred. Can you discuss from an insider perspective how seriously the intelligence community actually takes the law that requires them to mask the name of Americans who are incidentally collected while talking to people who are legitimate targets of collection?
They take this responsibility very seriously. Obviously, innocent Americans are going to be caught up in communications when they try to get a meeting with a Russian leader. And that's Tucker's job, to get meetings with interesting people. That doesn't make him a traitor or a spy. His name should have been masked or minimized in the report. And what happens is that a senior official can ask that that name be unmasked to understand the content of the intelligence report. It's an unusual thing to ask for. And we know, however, the Obama administration misused the unmasking procedure hundreds and hundreds of times. But I will tell you that NSA takes this very, very seriously because they're not allowed to spy on American citizens.
So give me an example. If an NSA employee is the one responsible for monitoring the communication of, these Putin cronies, how many people within the NSA would have known that it was Tucker Carlson communicating with them? I guess, how deep is that layer? Would this have been something that's an open secret among most NSA employees, or is this really a need-to-know basis that just a few NSA employees know who the name actually is?
That's a good question, because some journalists think that once a name is unmasked, everyone knows. That's not true. A very small number of NSA employees would know Tucker Carlson's name. If it was unmasked, it would be unmasked only for the use of the senior official who asked for it. Other NSA employees would not be informed, and the person who was given this information would be told they have to keep this strictly confidential because this information is so sensitive.
So the way I see it then is one of two things could have happened here that led to Tucker Carlson's name being revealed in the way that it was. Either it was water cooler gossip that got out of hand because it's kind of juicy gossip, right? Tucker Carlson wants to interview Putin, and that whoever had the responsibility for keeping that name private, who actually masked the name, did not keep that a secret, and then the word spread among the NSA. That's option number one. Or option number two, these high-ranking officials in the Biden administration, whom you mentioned, actually requested the unmasking of the name. What are the likelihoods of scenario one versus scenario two?
I find it hard to believe that an NSA employee did this. I think Tucker has said he thinks that's what happened. But I think NSA takes it seriously, and I think NSA employees know how badly it would hurt them if they were caught leaking the name of someone who hates their organization so much. Maybe they're stupid, Liz, but I don't think they're that stupid. But we know there are people in the Biden administration who have a history of abusing unmasking. Susan Rice is in the White House. She's done this before. She's admitted to it. And I think she's a prime suspect on where this unmasking came from.
And I would tend to agree. I mean, obviously I have no insider information on this, but I would tend to agree with you given their history, because behavior typically forms a pattern. That is the pattern of behavior that we've seen, unfortunately, from the intelligence community. I said on my show, I find this to be very disappointing and disillusioning. I spent my young adult years really admiring the alphabet soup agencies, the men and women who served almost in a lesser profile way than the military, for example. They risked their life. They didn't get the same recognition that the military does. And espionage has been a great part of the history of our world and the history of protecting our country. It's a shame to see these agencies devolve into political entities as they are. But let me ask you this. If it was a high-ranking Biden administration official, then why did the NSA itself issue the type of denial that it did? Why didn't the NSA, to protect their own reputation, sort of bump responsibility back over to the Biden White House?
Well, NSA gave a very bureaucratic response. They sort of were saying that, well, he's not a target, but we may have been looking at his emails and other electronic communications. They should have said quite clearly, we haven't accessed Tucker Carlson's communications. We haven't violated his civil rights. But I think you touch on another interesting point. Most intelligence officers are ethical. They're not political. They do incredible work to defend our country. We need more of them to speak out as whistleblowers when they see this kind of stuff going on. Someone knows who unmasked this name. And we need to have an NSA employee come forward and say who that was to the intelligence committees.
Well, they certainly should, or else, I mean, if this can happen to Tucker Carlson, if it can happen to General Michael Flynn, if it can happen to Donald Trump when he was the president and the president-elect and candidate Trump, then it certainly can happen to everyday American citizens like you and me. And here's, I guess, a strategic question. So you call it a bureaucratic response from the NSA. It certainly was that. But could their response, because their response is a head scratcher to me, so I'm trying to unpack it in a sense. Could their response have been deliberately not a denial so that, in a sense, that tips their hand to say, hey, this was the Biden White House that did this. It wasn't us?
I think it was a bureaucratic response because they knew they had accessed Tucker's communications. Now, it had not been leaked yet on exactly what Tucker was communicating about. But I think they were careful because they knew they had accessed these records. They were just not admitting it because they hadn't necessarily done anything illegal. The fact that this whistleblower talked to Tucker and supposedly read his emails over the phone to him, if that's true, it represents misconduct by the NSA.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit about the misconduct. As I said, I'm not the only American who's sitting here having lost faith in these, in the intelligence community, even the criminal justice system, because the FBI is part of this as well. You know, whether it's the CIA, whether it's the Department of Justice and the FBI, whether it's the NSA, you know, all these alphabet soup agencies, essentially. What do we do to reform them? Because we've had a Republican president in Donald Trump. We had a Republican president appoint a new we appoint people to be put in charge of these agencies that were supposed to reform them, and yet still they were weaponized against him, whether we're talking about the so-called whistleblower about the Ukraine stuff, which led to an impeachment of a sitting president, even though it was an absolute nothing burger, whether it's this spying on an American journalist and leaking his name for political purposes from the NSA. What do we actually do? What do we need to do to actually clean these places up?
Well, we need a Republican president who's prepared to install good leaders who will bring in lots of people to make sure these intelligence officers do their job and keep politics out of their work. And I think in agencies like the CIA, hundreds of people should be let go. Hundreds of people who were promoted by Democratic administrations who are basically partisan hacks. They're not contributing to the mission. You've probably seen other reports about these woke recruitment videos that the CIA is putting out. They were developed during the Trump administration. And look, President Trump will be the first to admit he could have done better in personnel. He learned about this too late in his administration. If he had been reelected, I think he would have filled a lot of agencies with better people, and they would have brought good people several levels down to transform the bureaucracy and get politics out of their work.
Yeah, and that certainly needs to be done. I've talked about often on my show how this isn't a matter of just firing the leader of one specific agency. And if you do that, you essentially play whack-a-mole because another bureaucrat, another swamp creature pops up in their place. This is really the fault of the administrative state, and it's not just a one-man job to clean it up. It also requires Congress. But going back to Congress for a second, and this speaks to your experience not just on the House Intelligence Committee, but you were a whistleblower for the CIA yourself. You say that a whistleblower from the NSA should talk to the intelligence committees, both the House and the Senate, about the unmasking of Tucker's name, who unmasked Tucker's name. What advice would you give this whistleblower? How do you go about doing this? And I think a lot of people, and this is human nature, are going to feel protective of their own careers because they know if they become a whistleblower, then they've essentially ruined their career in the government.
Well, you can go to the intelligence committees and they will serve as a safe harbor, not tell anyone you went to them. It's possible to go to the staff of both committees. If you ran into someone like this, I would say they should go to the staff of Devin Nunes, start with his personal office and say that you'd like to speak to someone on the Intelligence Committee staff who works for him. And Nunes' personal office will arrange something. And if someone doesn't want to do that, they can contact me. I know Nunes' staff. I know people in the House Intelligence and Senate Intelligence Committee staffs. I'd be happy to link them up. But look, you're taking a chance by doing this, but you're taking a chance for the security of our country. And if someone sees something seriously wrong, they need to speak up.
And my question to you is, because like I said, you've had this experience, is it worth it?
It's worth it. But when I lodged my complaint, I sent my complaint to the CIA director, the inspector general, and I threatened to send it to both Senate and House Intelligence Committees. And I more or less won. It wasn't a complete victory, but I kept them from throwing me out.
And Fred, last question, and I think this is a question that a lot of people have in their minds. How often do these abuses happen that we just don't hear about it because Tucker Carlson, hosts one of the top-rated cable news shows in the entire country? He's one of the leading voices of the conservative movement in the entire country. How often does this happen when two people who don't hear about it, who don't have a platform like Tucker's?
Well, I mean, Tucker happened to know a whistleblower. I think it goes on far more than we realize. That's why we need bona fide whistleblowers to speak out and come forward. I don't think most of these intelligence officers are politicized, but I think many of them are, and I think they're getting away with it.
Well, there you go. That's not exactly the answer that I think the American people want to hear, but it's one that we need to hear because we need to take care of this problem. Fred, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Good to be here. Thanks.